A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If the audio is available and clear, kindly. Thank you. Hello, a very warm good evening to all of you, and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's webinar, where we shall be talking about the portions which are relevant for your GS paper 3 in the mains examination from the area of environment ecology as well as science and tech. So today we are going to cover the mains based current affairs which have appeared in the news or have remained relevant in the news for the past month, and we shall analyze how these topics can be asked, can be framed for the examination purposes. So without further ado, let us initiate the discussion. So before initiating the discussion, a minor announcement. So we have commenced the mains test series program. All of you who need an improvement in your answer writing, and I think that covers every one of us, that those people, those candidates should definitely be appearing for the mains test series. The purpose as of now should be to inculcate the habit of writing, to write as much as possible so that you get the valuable feedback in the timely process and a timely manner as well. Now, you will get the details about the mains test series, and basically, it has already commenced. The first paper has been held. That was the essay paper, and it will continue over the weekends. Now, coming to the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for. So, today we are going to hold the discussion for 6 different topics, all of them with an orientation of mains examination in mind. So, the first topic that we are going to discuss is the concept of green GDP. What do we understand by green GDP? Right? What is the purpose of it? Why is it important? And also, what are the various different challenges which we face in order to adopt the process of green GDP? That is something that we are going to cover. Then after that, we are going to cover the fortification of rice, because it was in news recently due to certain amounts of misinformation which was spreading. So the ministry had to come out and issue a clarification. So fortification of rice has been in news. So we are going to discuss that. Plastic recycling. Things are not as good when you recycle the products, and also there is increased chance of contamination and toxicity spreading due to the recycling processes also. So that is again something that we are going to discuss. Then decarbonizing the steel sector. Now, iron and steel sector is very, very important for any particular country's industrial or rather developmental requirements. And that iron and steel sector is significantly carbon intensive. So that is basically the decarbonization part we are going to talk about. And then we are going to discuss a topic which has appeared in the magazine of Kurukshetra for the month of May, and one which has appeared in Yojana, so that you have a holistic preparation for your mains examination. So we are going to talk about urban planning and the use of technology in that, and also the promotion of handicraft and handloom sector. So these are the areas that we are going to elaborate upon. So taking up the first topic of the day, and that is green GDP. What do we understand by that? GDP basically refers to gross domestic product. Now, what do we understand by green GDP? What is the concept behind it? So, here, the aspect or the importance of green GDP can be gauged from the fact that in today's changing scenario, in today's changing world, sustainability is as important as it ever was. So, that is why, in order to preserve the environment, conserve the environmental processes, we need to account for the changes which are happening in the environment in our quest for growth. The world has witnessed the debate about development versus environmental conservation for many, many decades now. And in the name of development and economic growth, there has been a significant degradation which has been caused to the environment. So this green GDP aims to counter that. So what is it? So when we talk about it here, basically, what do we understand by green GDP here? Is the audio clear, or is there an issue in the audio? Okay, just a moment. We'll get it resolved. If there is an echo, give me a couple of moments. We'll get it resolved. A confirmation about the audio? Okay, thank you. Just a moment. Okay, so we are getting it resolved as soon as possible. So, till that point of time, we continue with the concept of green GDP. So, understand this basic fact. And when we talk about green GDP, or when any type of question or concept is asked from green GDP, understand the purpose of it. So the environmental growth, the quest for environmental growth, that has come at a significant cost of the damages which have been created. So that is why we need to account for those. And this green GDP is a concept which talks about the fact that if you are developing, let's say there has been a significant increase or augmentation in the economic output, so simultaneously you have to take into account that what has been the losses that which we have encountered in terms of the degradation to, let's say, the natural landscape, etc. So it is an indicator of economic growth with environmental factors taken into consideration along with the standard GDP of a country, and factors the biodiversity losses and the costs attributed to even climate change. Now the entire world is moving towards this particular concept. In fact, in the latest conference of parties for the Convention to Biological Diversity, if you would have noted that in the portion of current affairs, there was an increased debate and discussion. And basically, the large corporates and multinationals, they have been in a way nudged to perform the kind of an accounting and give a detailed account to the customers about where is it that their products are utilizing the environmental aspect or the environmental services, and whether it is sustainable production or not. So that is why the entire world is shifting towards it. So that is where green GDP comes into prominence. Now, when we say environmental factors to be taken into account, how do we do that? It is a different matter to say in an abstract manner that, okay, take the losses of trees into account, take the amount of emissions or pollution into account. But how do we end up achieving that? So that can be done with the help of a host of factors. So, for example, in the production mechanism, here including environmentally beneficial or harmful goods and services. They have to be separated. That which are the products which provide environmental benefits, which are the products which provide a kind of an environmental damage out there. Even in the case of consumption, when we consume certain products, when we buy certain products out there from the market, whether those products are environmentally friendly or not, that also needs to be understood. So based upon the zero carbon generating, less environmentally degrading and environment depleting products. So there also, for example, let's suppose you are consuming any of the electronic items. Now, whether that electronic item has been produced in an environmentally safe manner, or whether there has been a discrepancy in that. So that will be accounted for in the consumption process as well. And in the GDP, the gross domestic product that you talk about, investment has got a major role to play in terms of accounting. So there also, in the investments which are brought to the country or done to the country in within the country, where is it that the investment has been done in zero carbon and conventional carbon generating technologies? So like that, individually at each of the times and at each of the stages, you account for this, that whether it is an environmentally safe product or not. Even when we talk about human capital, bifurcation of jobs based on conservation and conventional sectors. For example, take the case of renewables. Renewable energy production will be brought under the aspect of conservation of environment. And when you talk about, let's say, a coal-based thermal power plant, now that coal-based thermal power plant will come under the conventional sector. So there also, let's suppose you have a large section of citizens being employed in energy generation sector. Now, the government, let's suppose, has to pay them salary. Now, that salary, for example, whether it is going into the environmentally cleaner areas or whether it is going into a kind of a non-renewable sector or a fossil fuel sector, that needs to be accounted for. Even in the case with income to the government, taxes levied and subsidies advanced to the polluting sectors, many of the times we end up providing subsidies. For example, take the simple case of fertilizer production. When we talk about fertilizers, now these fertilizers, they are produced from what? Where is it that these fertilizers are produced from? Human capital, Vivek, basically refers to the human resource that you have. Very good. So fertilizers are produced from the fossil fuels like natural gas, right? So those fossil fuels, they also, when you provide subsidy or subsidization to the fertilizer sector, so in a way you are subsidizing the production of fertilizer from the fossil fuels. So that also needs to be understood, that whether you are levying taxes or subsidies, whether you are providing a kind of an indirect support to the environmentally destructive sources and products. So all that needs to be counted for. Then why is it not being done? And what is the significance of it? So let us understand that. Conventional sector, here Ayush refers to those particular sectors which are reliant on the resources which end up depleting the environmental status or the present conditions of the environment that gets degraded. For example, you have the transportation sector, you have iron and steel sector, you have the fertilizers, you have aluminium sector. All of these, they end up significantly polluting and harming the environment in the long run. So those will be under conventional sector. For example, take the case of, let's suppose, if you have green hydrogen production or any green fuel that is produced, that will be under conservation sector. Okay, I hope that is understood. Bifurcation means division. Bifurcation means, so when you have, let's say you are paying the employees some money, or you have a lot of people employed in government sector. Now in government sector, take a branch or take any particular company like NTPC. Now NTPC, that is the National Thermal Power Corporation, that manufactures or that produces power based upon coal. So that coal will end up polluting the environment. So that income that you are giving needs to be separated from the income that is given to, let's say, someone working in a wind energy farm or someone working in a solar park. So that is a conservation industry, so to say. Okay, I hope that is understood. So, the significance of green GDP basically is it ensures sustainability to the environment, right? Sustainability to the environment. How? Overall, if you keep the accounting of it, if you keep a kind of an idea about it, that where you are basically investing more or which sector is polluting the environment more, over a period of time you will be nudged towards those particular processes, those particular economic activities which will provide sustainability to the environment. What is sustainable development in general? Sustainable development is basically utilization of resources in a judicious manner, in such a way that the resources are available for us today, but the same resources will also be available for the future generation. That is the aspect of sustainability. Okay. Then, here, we will also be able to gain if we start looking at green GDP and we start taking into account the environmental losses, the tangible valuation to the environment cost. Because till now, if you observe the entire global movement to conserve the environment, everybody talks about that why it is important to save environment, this will help us in the long run, etc. But once you take into account, for example, let's suppose when we all talk about China's growth story, the stupendous growth that China achieved for almost 3 decades since the 1980s. Now, if you take into account the environmental loss that has happened, maybe in billions or even trillions of dollars, that gives you a kind of a real idea, real world idea about what is happening and what is the loss that we are staring at. Because many of the times the environmental losses, they don't immediately or at an upfront manner, they don't indicate themselves. They have a knack to indicate or to show themselves suddenly, one at a time. For example, take the case of our neighboring country of Pakistan. Pakistan has suffered last year from one of the most devastating floods occurred in the region of South Asia for the past decade almost. And that is an environmental cost that Pakistan is paying. For what? For climate change. So that is the environmental cost which needs to be put a value at, so that the next time that the government is investing in, let's say, opening up a new power plant based upon coal, it has to understand that this will give me, let's say, 270 megawatts of power. At the same time, I'll end up losing around $2 billion in terms of environmental damage. So, helps make long term decisions about investments and new sectors. Okay. Then resource management will also be more efficient in that case. We will be able to manage the resource in a much more efficient manner, right? Why and how? Because when you take the environmental cost into action, or when you account for that, then obviously you will try to achieve the more efficient manner of production. Because right now you don't have an accounting. Once the accounting will be done, you will always be judicious. And this will also provide a general direction to the policy. Here, policy direction refers to or can be taken at both the levels, that is, national as well as international. National as well as international. Okay. So, at the national as well as the international level, when we talk about devising government policies, for example, the government came up with the PLI scheme. I'm sure all of you would be aware about the production linked incentive scheme that the government has come up in order to boost the manufacturing sector. Now, that PLI scheme focuses on many of the industries. One of the industries is semiconductor. Now, semiconductor industry overall is significantly water intensive, requires significant amount of water, and has got some amount of environmental damage associated with it. So, when you are providing the schemes for support to such industries, you should have an idea about the environmental damage, and thereby you can provide an adequate policy measure or a kind of a producer responsibility kind of an action about how to not go for those particular sectoral investment. And even in the case of international mechanisms, green GDP gives you the real picture. Then nudge to the private sector. So if overall the government ends up following this accounting on the basis of environment and environmental damages, so that will observe, or that will basically lead to a scenario where even, let's say, any private company, let's say Reliance, if tomorrow starts investing in a new oil refinery, builds up a new oil refinery, and if we get to know that this is the environmental damage that is going to be caused by the refinery, slowly and steadily you will see that the private sector also is nudged towards the cleaner and sustainable manners of production. So that is where the overall producer consumer scenario is going to improve quite substantially once we switch to the portion of green GDP. Now, what are the challenges that we face? The challenges in implementing them are very simple and very apparent. First of all, we don't have the available and reliable data which is present. That, for example, let's say how much amount of carbon dioxide exactly is emitted, along with the various different outputs and products and emissions carried out by any particular industry in general. We have a broader outlook, but not the area based definite outcome. And also, we are unable to fix a value to it. That if, let's say, 11 tons of carbon dioxide has been emitted into the atmosphere, I have established an industry that is polluting, and it has emitted 11 tons of carbon dioxide, let's suppose, in 1 month. But what is the economic value that you will fix to it? There has to be an international norm to it. It cannot be that India values 11 ton of carbon dioxide, let's say, at 1 lakh rupees, and United States values it at 1 crore. So you need a fixed platform or a fixed valuation for the same. So that is where what value has to be assigned also needs to be understood, and that picture is not clear as of now. You had various different countries which tried to adopt this. For example, China, United States, Sweden, right? All these countries basically have already tried to adopt the processes of green GDP. But here in this situation, what happened was that when China started calculating that what was the economic damage which was caused in terms of the economic growth and the environmental damages, it found out that its GDP growth could be turned into negative. So China removed that figure and data. Same was the case with United States. Sweden is close to adopting that. And Sweden has been adopting the green accounting and so on, and all the measures where the accounting is being maintained rather, that where is it that more money is being lost in the environment, and where is it that we need to invest sectorally. So policy implementation is also a challenge unless and until we have a clear cut economic data, that where we are losing, how much we are losing, let's say, by deforestation. We don't have an idea about that. How much are we losing because of pollutants settling down in the Himalayan ranges, leading to increased heating of the snow and ice? We don't have an economic data. So as long as we don't have a definite economic parameter, how will we expect the government to devise a policy for the same? So that is why even the policy measures are lacking quite significantly. And most of all, when we talk about the developing nations, developing nations, they oftentimes face developmental urgencies. For example, if you consider a country like India, Now, India has got many developmental urgencies. Infrastructure building. For infrastructure, you need what? Large scale production of iron and steel. Let's say India also needs to bolster its defense forces. Now, for that defense forces, what is it that India requires? Again, steel, amongst others. Power or energy is required. You all would be observant of the fact that how every year it is getting warmer and warmer by the day. So we face a problem of energy security. Energy is not being made available at affordable prices across the country. Right? There is a lack of energy production in general observed sometimes during the summer months. Now, for that, what do? You import coal. You start producing more thermal power. Why? Because you need to fulfill the requirements of the citizens. So you cannot have a country like India taking a stance that, okay, people of the country, they are not receiving electricity due to which their shops and industries are getting closed. Fair enough. Let's not worry about that. I will build another solar power plant that will become active after 4 years, and then we will provide them electricity. You cannot have that. So, in these developing nations, due to the developmental urgencies, oftentimes you have huge investments being carried out in sectors such as iron and steel, coal power or thermal power, right? Infrastructure building. Now, all these sectors, basically, just to give you a brief gist of it, there are other sectors also. For example, the farmers, they require fertilizers. There is no two way about it. And for fertilizers, you need a natural gas. So you need to extract the fossil fuel. That will pollute the environment. You need transportation to be available, right? Because the transportation, if it is available, people can move. And when the transportation is available, that means there will be greater vehicle number of vehicles on the road, and that means greater amount of pollution. So these are developmental urgencies. Now, over a period of time, basically, this is what is environmentally damaging. Okay, it is environmentally damaging. And here, the other challenge that we face is we don't have any comparative study that what is the threshold till which we can compromise with the economic growth in order to bolster the environmental protection. So there is no comparative study which is available, no historical data which is available, that which country during which stage of their growth story, what amount of environmental degradation do they have to manage. So these are the major challenges which are faced in terms of developmental requirements or in terms of adoption of green GDP. That is why green GDP till now has not been adopted globally and in particular India as well. So what is the way forward? The way forward, first of all, development of a common framework, and that needs to be an international framework. That needs to be an international framework, a regulatory mechanism, or a kind of a value allocation for environmental degradation, allocation for environmental degradation. Right. So that needs to be established. That if, let's say, I am accounting for deforestation, I also need to account for the soil erosion which is caused by deforestation. And when the soil erosion happens, there is an increased unproductiveness. There is a kind of a probability of desertification also happening. So that also needs to be accounted for. So what are the factors which need to be accounted for? That needs to be clarified, and that has to be a global framework for that. That will bring many countries into the process, into the ambit of this. Increasing awareness. As of now, the larger mass, the larger public, they are not aware about that, about the fact that economic growth causes environmental damage on a substantial extent. Many of them are not aware about the fact that these environmental damages, they are significantly costly in terms of the value that we end up paying, maybe in the form of dispersed sense of rainfall that we are receiving, dry conditions and dry months that we receive, increased amount of floods, cloudbursts, induced landslides that we are facing, the disasters that we face because of environmental damage. So people are not aware. And you cannot blame the public for that. Even the policymakers are not aware, right? So they are still not aware about what do we understand by the economic perspective of environmental damage. So you need a kind of a mass awareness. Then you cannot end up implementing a project like this suddenly on a large national scale, because there will be so many other variables at play that data will be completely unreliable. So what we can do is, a particular part of the country, let's consider any industrial part of the country, let's consider Tamil Nadu for example, and we have to initiate the accounting process at a small level, at a small scale, so that there can be learnings from that. That, for example, Tamil Nadu is a manufacturing hub, and Tamil Nadu, along with Karnataka, is one of the significantly fast growing economies in the country. Now, if there is an economic growth happening in these states, what is the environmental damage? So, start small so that we are able to provide corrections. And here, we need a proper connect with the academia. Academia, the civil society, academia here refers to the knowledgeable people, the researchers who are available, the environmentalists who are available. We can take the help of IPCC as well, UNEP. So those particular organizations, they can help us understand the exact implication of the damages caused to the environment. Then promotion as a good practice. This is more of a kind of a nudge practice that everybody will be slowly and steadily moving towards sustainable methods of consumption and production. So that is basically the way forward. So in total, till now, what is it that we have studied? So a quick recap. We have studied about green GDP. What is green GDP? So it is the calculation of GDP by taking into account the losses and the damages caused to environment in order to achieve that economic growth. So you take that into account. That is the concept of green GDP. Now, why that green GDP is required? That is something that we studied. What are the challenges, why we are not adopting it, and what is the way forward? These are the things that we have studied. You can have questions appearing in the mains from this area. But here you can also have a portion which is relevant even for your prelims. So here, Sweden basically has started adopting the Global Green Economy Index and has started observing the indicators and following the parameters required for this index. So this is relevant for your prelims, a fact-based information trivia, so to say. So Global Green Economy Index is a measure of the green economy performance of 160 countries, published by whom? By Dual Citizen, a consultancy firm. So here you don't particularly need to carry out a research about what this consultancy firm is, where this consultancy firm is, etc. Not required. You just need to be aware about who comes out with this Global Green Economy Index. So it ranks 160 countries, out of which India was 144th. Now, this Global Green Economy Index has got four dimensions, and amongst those four dimensions, the countries are rated. And within those dimensions, you have many different indicators. For example, equity, or in a way, equality in participation of the labor force. You have the amount of carbon content emitted into the atmosphere. All of that, they are included in these four dimensions. So climate change and social equity, sector decarbonization. That how much is it that transportation is leading to carbon emission? How much is it that iron and steel, fertilizer, aluminium, how are they contributing to the carbon emission into the atmosphere? The markets and the investments which are happening in the green sector and the traditional conventional sector, so to say, and the status of the environmental health. So based upon these four, you have the marking which is done, you have the index which is arrived at. So that is your global green economy index. This is relevant for your prelims. Okay. Now, the question based on this, what is the concept of green GDP? And discuss the advantages, challenges, and adoption of green GDP as an economic indicator, and also briefly mention the way forward to in order to achieve that. So here, if you take a look at the question, always while writing the answer, start the introduction directly by talking about the first part, the basic definition of green GDP. Okay, so provide the basic definition. Okay, what is green GDP? That is the economic growth that you encounter, that you take into account the environmental damages caused for the economic growth. So you have the definition provided in the PPT itself. You can directly take that. Then after that, in the body, you discuss one by one why is it that the green GDP is relevant, provide certain examples, the advantages, all those advantages that we have talked about, write a heading, subparagraph, underline it, write a couple of sentences. Then similarly about the challenges and the way forward that we have discussed, you can always provide that. Okay. So now we move on to the second topic, that is fortification of rice. Now, what do we understand by fortification? So fortification basically refers to the nutrient enrichment which is done for any food grain or any food crop. So it is the process of adding nutrients to food products that are not naturally present or are not present in sufficient amounts. So because the food grains that we consume, they do not necessarily consist of the required minerals and vitamins as per the body's own requirement. And in a country like India, where you have large number of malnourished population in terms of child malnourishment and malnutrition, if you consider, we have one of the largest population of malnourished children across the globe. So that is where fortification comes in handy. And in fortification, what kind of minerals do we add, or what kind of supplements do we add to the crops? So maybe vitamin A, vitamin B12, B1, iron, zinc, folic acid. These are basically added to the grains, to the products. That is basically fortification. Now here, when we talk about the fortification of rice, so when we fortify the rice, when we carry out the fortification of rice, as per FSSAI, and as per the norms established, 1 kg of fortified rice should contain iron, folic acid, and vitamin B12. All of this is very essential for a healthy growth of the body. Folic acid, for example, it helps create new proteins, helps create RBCs, helps in the formation of RBCs to form RBCs. And when the RBCs are created, in that case, what do we observe? You don't have the cases of anemia. Our country is again one of those which has an absolute one of the largest numbers of people suffering from anemia in general. So that is where folic acid is helpful. And so is the case with iron. Iron is very helpful in order to provide and produce RBCs and hemoglobin, and that is essential. And then vitamin B12 is essential for the tissue growth of the body as well. So these are basically added to the rice, the fortified rice that we talk about. These are the nutrients and the minerals which are added to it. Now, why is it that there is a need for fortification? That needs to be understood significantly. So when we talk about fortification, why do we require that? Because we have to understand that presently in our country, you don't have so much shortage of food grains. people get the availability of food. They are able to get some food on the table. The problem is that the food is not nutritious enough because of various different governmental schemes and measures. For example, since take the case of National Food Security Act, or take the case of since the time of the COVID pandemic, the government has been distributing free ration to a large section of population. So the food grains are being made available both at the central as well as the state level. But those food grains, just the consumption of wheat rice, that doesn't give you the exact amount of nourishment required. And that is where a large section of population suffers from malnutrition and iron deficiency. Now, when you talk about products such as iron, now iron is present in large quantities in animal, let's say, animal protein that you have, the meat products, and also in products such as spinach, etc. Now, both of them are not consumed by a large section of the population. So there is an increased iron deficiency. So as a result of that, you have very large section of mothers who suffer from anemia. And that is when they enter into the phase of maternity, you have, as per the estimate of WHO, close to around 53% of the women in a country, they suffer from the condition of anemia to various extent. Now, as a result of that, as a consequence of that, when they enter into the maternal phase, that is when you have a lot of complications, pregnancy issue related complications and issues, which also impacts the child health. Now, if the mother is suffering from anemia at the time of childbirth, not only will the pregnancy be a lot more complicated, but at the same time, the child will also turn out to be malnourished and might have various different problems associated. So that is why iron deficiency needs to be catered to, and for that, fortification is a good source. And rice, for example, is one of the most common staple food consumed when you go from north to south, east to west of the country. Rice is one of the staple food. So if you are able to fortify rice, that will always benefit larger population. Here, when we produce the various different types of rice, when we finally end up generating the end product of rice, a lot of those nutrients are lost during the polishing process, during the milling process, during the refining process. So the rice grains that you buy from the market, eventually when it reaches your table, by that point of time, it has lost almost all its nutritional benefits. So you are basically left with a kind of a malnourished food source in itself. So, hence, fortification is required. Now, the benefits of these elements, of these particular nutrients, it helps in attaining an improved cognitive development. Cognitive development means you have a better mental capacity, and mental growth also happens. This is particularly relevant for the children and the child population, younger population. Why? Because in our country, a country where you have 65% of the population below the age of 35 years, it is very, very relevant and important that if you have to attain a larger section of productivity from the human capital that we have, we need to have a proper mental development and a cognitive growth. And for that, iron is required. It provides enhanced maternal health, reduced complications during pregnancy and childbirth, and also enhanced child health or infant health as well. So, improved child health, including including the prospect of reduced infant and maternal mortality. Is there any need to fortify wheat? Yes, that is also being debated. So basically, the crops, they are, see, you have certain types of crops such as millets. Millets naturally are very, very rich in iron, calcium, fiber, etc., and also B12. But when we talk about rice and wheat, they don't have the same nutritional quantity. So that is why you will find many people, you would also have come across such kind of people. You will find that they consume good food. It is not as if they don't consume food. They consume food, but still they will suffer from some or the other issues, maybe anemia, maybe a kind of a delayed muscle growth, maybe a kind of a stunting that they go through. So in the case of the children and the younger population, a lot of them, they suffer from stunting and wasting, right? The forms of malnutrition, I hope we are aware that you have. In the case of child health, the children, they suffer from the twin causes of stunting and wasting. Both of them are basically forms of malnutrition. What is stunting? Where for that particular age, the child's height has not increased or has not reached an average level. So, child's height is much lower than the average age group. So, that is stunting. And wasting is the lack of muscle development. For that age group, the amount of muscle development which should happen, that has not happened. So, both this stunting and wasting, that holds the potential to damage India's growth story in terms of the human capital that we have, the young population that we have, they will get damaged in the long run. Okay, now then, the challenges. What are the challenges faced in terms of fortification? So it is time dependent. You have to understand that once you fortify, let's say, a rice crop, it is not going to be perpetual that even after 100 years, if you consume that rice, it will still give you the same amount of nutrition and nourishment. No, it is basically time dependent. The nutrients that you add on to that artificially, those nutrients will slowly and steadily lose their potency and will also end up dissipating in the environment within the period of 45 to 60 days or sometimes 6 months in general. So it can become ineffective after some time. Now, it has also been found that a larger section of the some of the population and some people who suffer from genetic disorders, for example thalassemia. Thalassemia is a genetic disorder where you have excess iron build up in the body. Now those people or those citizens or those uh, that public, when they consume this fortified rice which has been fortified with iron and other contents, there can be an excessive iron build up in the body, and that can cause some amount of latent damage as well. So for this you need better research and development to be carried out. Okay, so it can trigger adverse reaction in people with genetic disorders. And then you have the technological and social barriers as well. Not only we do not have the adequate amount of technology available, but at the same time there's a large social barrier. If you tell an individual that this is a rice crop or this is the bowl of rice where you have extracted it from the farm, given the fertilizers, etc., and here is a fortified rice bowl, you will find that people will choose the one which has been brought from the farm, regardless of the fertilizers that you have added, because there's a social barrier. There is a kind of an inhibition in accepting something which has been added artificially. So that social barrier needs to be overcome. And how will it be overcome? By creating awareness. Please understand, as you study various different topics for your syllabus, please understand one basic fact. When you are able to figure out the challenges, always advisable to figure out the way forward along with that. Okay? Because for each of the challenge, you will have a kind of a way forward that you can always associate. So, what is the way forward? The way forward is biofortification. What do we understand by biofortification now? So, biofortification is basically when you add these nutrients into the crops at the time of growth itself. So, many of the times it is done by modifying the seeds, by providing certain additional nutrients within the seeds itself. So, this is a natural provision of the nutrients into the crop grains directly at the time of growing. Okay, so direct addition of nutrients into the crops. Into the crops. So that removes the requirement of artificial fortification which is carried out. So this will still bring about a better social acceptance, because if people are aware that this has been grown in the farmland and has been brought to me directly without going for various different additions and additives in the food parks, etc., people will be more ready to buy that. So this brings about greater social acceptance, brings greater social acceptance. Okay, increased amount of research and development, and also raising the awareness levels. Now the government has been carrying this out for a long time. We have fortified products amongst us, all of us. We use fortified products. You have fortification of milk which is done, you have fortification of salt which is done. You would have heard about the ads since your very childhood days about the importance of iodized salt, for example. All the advertisements that run on television, I'm sure you would have listened to that or heard that, that iodized salt is important, is very nourishing, etc. Now what is that iodized salt? You add iodine by the process of fortification. How do you do that? Or why do you do that rather? You do that in order to provide a healthy growth hormone into the body, right? So that is where the iodine is added. So this fortification is carried out in milk products, in food products, etc., but the awareness is still lacking quite significantly. Okay, so that is basically the challenges associated. So what is fortification? We have seen artificial addition of nutrients. What are the challenges which are faced? What is the fortification which is done in the rice? In rice in India, as per the FSSAI, 1 kg of rice should include the presence of iron, folic acid, and vitamin B12. All of these should be present, right? So you should be aware of that. Here you can have a prelims type question frame from this. Now, what is meant by fortification of rice? Discuss the need for the process in India and the challenges faced. So here again in the intro, directly address the first part, that is the concept of fortification. That is the concept of fortification here. And then after that, here in the end portion of the introduction itself, you can start talking about that India is a country with large section of malnourished population. We have the largest malnourished amount number of children in the entirety of the world. And then you can switch over to the needs. Why is it that fortification is required in the country? And then you can talk about the challenges faced, and also if you have scope, talk about way forward as well. Okay, now after that, uh, we come to the next topic, right, Shunya? That is how we can approach that. And Kirubaga, does fortification cause any health issues since it is added artificially? So not always, but then as I told you that in certain cases when people suffer from certain genetic diseases, there can be a disadvantage associated. Sabah, how to spread awareness, even illiterate people can understand such issues. The problem is that when we think about, let's say, when we think about the aspect of malnutrition, larger section in the country, they still feel that malnutrition is because we don't consume enough food, right? If you go to a larger section of the population, they will tell you, eat more food, there will be no malnutrition. But that is not the case. People are consuming food in as much quantity as they should, but then they still face malnutrition. Why? Because now during the process of food processing, you have a lot of nutrients which are being drained off. So that is where the awareness level needs to be raised. That is where we need to raise these issues, that how more than half of the female population that we have, they are on the verge of suffering from anemia. And The larger public needs to be made aware about what are the complications associated with anemia. Only then will you observe some amount of improvement. Yes. And correct, Parthasarthi. Nukkad Nataks can be conducted. It's good if we give for negative conclusion. No, conclusion should you should try to have a positive. Red tapeism for impact these projects. Vivek, are you talking about the green GDP aspect? So red tapeism has got its own role, but not in the case of green GDP because it has not caught up that much till now. So that is a limitation. Okay. Then how can we evaluate the answers? You send the answers to us and we will get it evaluated. You can send it to us at Target IS and we'll get that evaluated. So now we come to plastic recycling and the increased toxicity which is caused by that. Now, this is an article which has appeared in the Down to Earth magazine. Even Down to Earth magazine is very important for your mains examination as well as the prelims examination nowadays. So there you have a detailed research which has been published, and it is not so detailed as of now. It will be more made more public in the next couple of months, which talks about the fact that recycling of plastic is not the solution, the final solution that it was touted as, or it was thought upon to be, that recycling will be the solution to all the plastic problems that we face. But that is not the case. It has been found out that recycling of plastic also ends up generating lot of waste and lot of pollutants, lot of toxicants. So here, recycling may not be the panacea. Panacea basically means solution. Solution. Okay. So it may not be the solution for plastic pollution. It is touted to be. Touted means deemed to be or thought to be. And research basically indicates that it also, the process of recycling also increases the toxicity that you observe in the case of plastics, that is also increased. So here there was this research which tells us that plastics, they contain more than 13,000 chemicals, and 3200 of them, they are known to be hazardous to human beings. Now please understand that when you produce plastic, significant amount of plastic is produced by utilizing fossil fuels. In the entire process, I'm sure in your school days, in your science classes, you would have studied about how the crude oil is then distilled and you have various different types, petroleum, diesel, etc., tar, etc., which is separated. It is in those processes that the byproducts which are attained from that crude oil, that is utilized for plastic manufacturing. So naturally, it has got many toxicants which are present. And then in the manufacturing process, there are many other toxicants which are added. So that is why the plastics, they are not very healthy. Obviously, we all are aware of that. But then when you carry out the process of recycling, many of these hazardous toxicants, many of these hazardous materials, they are still prevalent and more dangerous. They escape into the environment, right? So recycled plastics, for example, I'm sure you would have heard that the Plastic Management Act or the Plastic Waste Act, that has been amended recently. Now, as per that, the plastics have been put under four categories. Categories depending upon, let's say you have single-use plastic, which are thought to be, or which are basically in the process of being removed from circulation. The single-use plastic is the plastic bags that you get from your vegetable vendors, the plastic cups that you get from maybe a shop, etc. So they are in the phase of being discontinued as per the intention of the government, at least. Then we have various different grades. For example, you have packaging waste. You have certain plastics which are hard, very very hard, right? They are used for larger packaging purposes. Now those plastics, they are supposed to be recycled. But then, in many of the times, those plastics are also utilized to manufacture containers, and in those larger containers, that is utilized to store chemicals or other pesticides, etc. And that gets ingrained in the plastic, and that comes to the surface at the time of recycling. So, Maybe a recycled plastic is generated and supplied and circulated in the market, but it can have traces of those hazardous toxicants which are present and hazardous toxins in general. So that is where the recycled plastics, they contain higher level of chemicals, and that can contaminate ecosystem. Now, the usage of plastic in the world, it is not reducing, it is increasing ever so rapidly. Now, that means in all the landfills, in all the garbage dumps that you come across, you'll find increased concentration of plastic waste. And I am sure you would be aware, or if you are not, you'd be interested to find out that this plastic, when it becomes, or when it is commingled with the waste, when it becomes very dry, it catches fire very easily. That is why recently, a couple of months back, you had this case of wildfire in the garbage dump near Kochi. Delhi experiences this almost every couple of years. So, all the garbage dumps which are present and which are ever so increasing across the country, that has got a lot of plastic waste. The usage of plastic in the world is going to increase by 3 to 4 times in the coming decade itself. So, in that case, plastic pollution, the plastic usage, if this is so high, it will lead to these wildfires across the garbage dumps. And when you have these wildfires, you have larger air pollution. Air pollution is very significant. Okay? Stockpile basically here refers to the dumps, the garbage dumps, etc., that we have present. That is here referring to the stockpile. So that is why there is a cause for the alarm. Now, this report also and this study has also indicated that there are three poisonous pathways for recycled material to accumulate toxic chemicals. First, direct contamination from toxic chemicals in the virgin plastic. So, for example, you are manufacturing plastic and or recycling the plastic, and as I told you, maybe you had a plastic container, out of that you are manufacturing a plastic bag, you are recycling it, but that plastic container, let's suppose, has some toxins that get ingrained, and that is where you can have the contamination which is happening. Then substance like plastic containers for pesticides, cleaning solvents, and others that enter the recycling chain and can contaminate plastic. Here, virgin plastic refers to the new plastic which is being produced. That is being produced for the first time. So, as I told you, even during the fractional distillation which is carried out for the crude oil, there also you have many toxicants, many hazardous toxicants which are directly introduced, and the plastic can get contaminated. And the recycling process, when the plastics are heated, in this case, the toxins commingle with the finished product. And when the toxins commingle with the finished product, in that case, very slow leaching, or in a way, very slow contamination is initiated. For whom? For the people exposed, and also in general environment. And in environment, always when you consider about plastic pollution, consider the biodiversity. UPSC had once asked this question about microbeads and microplastics. So, when the plastics are thrown into the ocean, many of the times they get broken down into very small, tiny pellets of sorts, and they are then taken in by the marine organisms. And many of the time, it ends up choking them because it enters into respiratory tracts. And you have a lot of plastic buildup in the body also, which leads to other set of complications. So that is where, if you have the contaminated plastic, imagine the consequences out there in the environment. That will be very disastrous. So what is the impact on health? So first of all, when you have the recycling process, that emits a lot of fumes, lot of different effluents, lot of emission, and those fumes can be carcinogenic, cancer causing. Carcinogenic here refers to cancer causing. So you have various furans, you have various fluorocarbons, etc., which are released. Dioxins, they are also released in the recycling process. And those people who are directly involved in the recycling process, they are most vulnerable to this exposure. And in a country like India and other developing nations of the world, the recycling process is largely carried out in informal sector. There is not the formalization of the recycling industry yet happening in India. So that is why you cover the entire aspect of integrated waste management. In developing countries, we have the informal sector which is dominant in waste management and waste recycling. So here, recycling process mostly dominated by informal sector. Okay. So as a result of that, poor safety standards of workers. Okay. And as a result of that, greater chances of exposure to emissions. Okay, and it is cancer causing. Then you have bioaccumulation. What is bioaccumulation? So, as I told you, in this case, the toxins they commingle with the finished product and slow contamination is initiated for the people exposed and even for the environment. So, here what happens is, slowly and steadily with the passage of time, the contaminant level builds up in the body, right? So, it is the building up, building up of the contaminant level in the body. Okay. And this happens with time. With time. Okay. So that is basically the resultant of the exposure to these toxicants and these hazardous chemicals over a period of time. And this bioaccumulation, by the way, is not only going to be experienced by the human population, it is going to be experienced by the larger faunal population or the animal population also. Then, another factor that the study has pointed out is that in the majority of the developing part of the world, this recycling process, which is dominated by the informal sector, you will not find it in the poshest areas of the cities. You will not find it in absolutely remote areas either. You will find it in those particular areas working at a small and the medium scale, micro scale industry level in those socially, economically backward regions. Right. So basically, the poorer section of the society is where these informal sectors they tend to operate. As a consequence of that, the poorer section gets greater amount of exposure to these toxins and these hazardous chemicals, and they can have a kind of a deleterious impact or a disadvantageous impact, where the young ones they will develop adverse birth outcomes, they will develop certain birth deformities, and that will be very debilitating for life in general. Okay. And why is that? This is generally observed in the poorer section. as majority of recycling centers are around economically poorer regions. Hence, there is a greater exposure. Poor sections of society get greater exposure. So, even in this case, you will observe that there is a kind of a class divide in terms of who suffers the most, and that is as horrendous as it can be. That you cannot have the thing that everybody, for example, air pollution, everybody suffers from it. When Delhi gets polluted, everybody suffers from it. But in this case, imagine you have the poorer section suffering significantly. So, what is the way forward? We need a legally binding global treaty for plastics, utility of plastics, usage of plastics, recycling of plastics, the grades of plastics which are available. So we need a legally binding global treaty where type of plastics need to be standardized. Right? Here also standard operating procedure to be followed for recycling. Okay? And the kind of plastic, we also need to arrive at a decision internationally that this kind of plastic we will not produce at all. Otherwise, what happens is when you have certain countries which will continue to produce, there will be an economic incentive associated, there will be an economic advantage associated. So that needs to be curbed. Also, when we produce plastic, you would have heard nowadays about the term green plastic, right? It is not a plastic which is green in color. It is a plastic which is produced from biomass in general, right? So you need to have cleaner sources for manufacturing of virgin plastic if you are doing so. So need for greener and cleaner plastic manufacturing. For example, biomass can be a source of manufacturing. Biomass development of plastic from biomass. Now, when you have the development of plastic from biomass, understand the larger benefit and the larger implication of the process. Not only will you find the case of the farmers, now they will find the utility of the biomass also. So it will increase the farm income slightly so. At the same time, the production process will require certain amount of technological efficiency. So you will be able to provide jobs in the process also. And when you provide jobs, that always adds demand to the economy. And economy, here we have seen that you have the rural demand, which is added. How? Because the farm income will increase. Why? Because now you are using the biomass. So for the manufacturing of plastic, and then also in the urban sector, also demand will increase because of a sustainable production mechanism. So this will bring about newer product development and a circular economy by augmenting or increasing the demand in urban and rural sector. Okay, Simultaneously, it will increase the demand. Then sharp reduction in consumption has to happen. There are no two ways about it. Single-use plastic ban, where the prime minister, when he declared the intention from the ramparts of Red Fort that single-use plastics will be banned in India, you had a mixed reaction of sorts. Many people, they are very averse to quitting plastic, right? Because plastic basically has got the benefit of having a greater carrying capacity and at the same time being extraordinarily cheap. The products, the alternatives for it, for example, the paper bag, if you consider, paper bag does not have that much carrying capacity. It can be cheap, but in that case it doesn't have the carrying capacity. Take the case of jute. Now jute bag has got a greater carrying capacity, but it is very costly. You cannot expect the vegetable vendor that you go to, they will start handing out jute bags for you. Many of the time the price of the jute bag will be costlier than the vegetables that you end up buying. So that is where the alternatives have not come in significant rate as they should have. So that is why still there is a hesitancy to shun plastic, but the consumption needs to stop, and we need to have strict policy measures to prevent the consumption of it, and proper disposal of it needs to be carried out. One country which has attained a kind of a phase out of single use plastic is, can we guess the name of the country which has attained a kind of a proficiency in terms of eliminating the single use plastic? I'll give you a hint. It is in Africa. It is an unexpected one, but it is in Africa. It is Rwanda. Rwanda is one of those unexpected areas where single use plastic ban or eliminating the single use plastic has met a kind of a resounding success. And that is quite surprising, I understand, but that is the case. So that is why that is something that we can basically bring in to have a reasonable outcome of the process. Now, there have been various different initiatives to tackle the plastic pollution. I'm sure we are aware of it. Now, plastic waste management rules have been amended in 2022, and there has been an extended producer responsibility associated. What is extended producer responsibility? It is basically a principle or a concept where, when we talk about the producer of the plastic, that producer is made responsible for handling the waste. For example, in simplest of the terms, let's suppose you as an individual, you are very environmentally conscious that I will never pollute the environment. But the summer months are here. You go to the market, you buy a soda can or you buy Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They will give it to you in plastic bottle. Now, after drinking it, eventually, unless until you are not at home, you will end up throwing it away, right? So inadvertently you are causing some amount of environmental pollution in the process. So that is where the producer themselves, they are made responsible for waste management, and that is a significant addition, a significant uh, or a welcome change which has been brought into the plastic management rules. Now here, another change, significant change which has been brought is the tradable EPR certificates or market mechanism has been brought in for greater handling of plastic waste. Does glass bottle affect the environment? Not as much. Glass largely consists of silica, something that you find in the sand also. So not that much impact is there, but glass bottle will not be very cheap either, right? So earlier, if you remember, all the majority of the manufacturers of cold drinks, for example, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, etc., they would have an endless supply of glass bottles. Now, why do you think they stopped that? Because it was proving to be costlier. Because in the glass bottles, when you recycle it, you have to take significant amount of measure in order to decontaminate it and so on. So that is why it is a costly process. And then you have a national dashboard which has been established on the elimination of single-use plastic and plastic waste management. And this dashboard will be monitored by CPCB, right? Central Pollution Control Board. They will monitor it. Central Pollution Control Board. Now, this Central Pollution Control Board or CPCB, is it a statutory organization or a non-statutory organization? Statutory means it has been established as per the law. Very good, it is statutory. As per which act? You should be aware of that. As per which act has this been statutory? CPCB Act? No. Good. It has been established as per Water Act 1974. Even if you only know Water Act, more than sufficient. You don't need to particularly by heart the year. Okay. So Water Act 1974 establishes this. So this is something relevant for your prelims. Now the question associated. Recycling of plastic can bring more woes, as in difficulties, if not carried out safely. So elucidate. Now this is a simple, straightforward, short question. So in this, the introduction should not be more than 25 words long in general. So here, talk about the recycling of plastic. What is this recycling? Right? So recycling is when you utilize or when you process the used plastic in order to manufacture the newer utilizable product. That is recycling. Now, recycling process in itself has got a lot of benefits, has got a drawback in the case of plastic also. So in the body portion, you talk about the benefits and then eventually you will target the woes or the difficulties, that is the challenges of contamination. Shri statutory basically refers to established as per the statute. Statute is a law or an act, right? So that is the statutory body. Okay, so the challenges that you talk about, and then eventually in the later portion of your body, you start talking about the way forward in terms of the international requirements of a requirement of a global framework, etc. You start talking about it in the later part of the body itself. And finally, in the conclusion, here you talk about strict policy measures in terms of sharp reduction in consumption. So you need to have mass public participation. Public participation. Yes, life can also be talked about. That you will have to reduce the consumption of it. That is the only outcome, or that is the only basically that is the only positive light that you can see at the end of the tunnel. Okay. Now, after this, we move on to the next topic. Before that, Elias, how EPR will work, how to make producer accountable. So the producers now they have to maintain a data about how much plastic they have produced, they have generated, and how much of it they have recycled back. So that is the data that they have to show to the government on the online portal. They have to maintain regularly. So by that, you can make them accountable. Let's say I have generated around 100 million tons of plastic. I have not recycled even 10 tons. So that is where you have the accountability which is fixed. And can we ban recycling of these poisonous plastic waste? Gulam, the problem in this case is that many of the plastic waste that you find in the landfills, in the garbage dumps, you are not aware about how toxic that is or what has been stored in that. So that is where it is very, very difficult to analyze that which has been exposed to toxicants, etc. Okay. Why we can't increase the cost of plastics by imposing high taxes rather than banning it for name's sake? Tareem, I don't think any government who wants to come back in power, any government who wants to fight elections again, I don't think they will impose greater taxes on plastics at all, because that plastic is utilized when you go to the vegetable vendor. That plastic is utilized when you go to the market to buy the smallest of the items. Now, if imagine if that is taxed, the amount of public backlash. Do one thing, introduce this kind of idea that you have. It is a novel idea. There is no two doubt about it. Talk to your family about it. That what do you think should be the condition if we start taxing, or if there is a tax imposed on plastics? Look at their reaction. You will gain an idea or gauge an idea about how the larger public will also react. So that is something which is not always advisable. Okay. Way forward, you can write in the later part of the body and some part of conclusion also. Okay. So now, why government not avoid them from economy? Government wants to avoid them. That is why the government announced it way back in 2019 that we are going to ban the single use plastic. But it is not so easy, my dear friend. Please understand that you have many local centers of production, and they naturally, the vendors that you go to, they will buy these plastics in bulk. The plastics will cost them maybe 10 paise, 15 paise. For them it is convenient, right? If the government bans them, in certain areas the government did ban them, but there was an open flouting of the norms, and that is very hard to execute the implementation of that. So there is implementation challenges that you also face. Okay. Now, people respond. We can always time. Many faculties said people responsibility. Why? Because unless and until the masses they get involved, you will not have a tangible change in the any of the consumption pattern or the production pattern. Only when the masses are involved, you have a meaningful change that is created. Okay. Now, after that, we come to the next topic, that is decarbonizing the steel sector. Now, steel is considered to be a backbone for the developmental process. And in developing countries like India, where we have painted a goal that by the year 2047, this is where we aim to be. This is the developmental ladder that we are aiming to climb up. In a country like India, where you have a billion plus population, largest population in the world, a lot of them entering into the workforce, there is immense scope for growth in the coming years. But that would mean a significant growth of the steel sector as well. Already, we are the second largest steel producers across the world after China. But then, the appetite for steel is ever so increasing. Be it the manufacturing of, let's say, the warships, right? The destroyers, the frigates, the aircraft carriers that you see, be it the manufacturing of submarines, be it the manufacturing of highways, roadways, railways, airports, all of them require steel. Now, steel is required, is very, very essential. But that steel in the production process emits a lot of carbon. So that is why steel sector is referred to as carbon intensive. Intensive sector. Okay. It emits a lot of carbon emission in the process. Now, here, there's a need to decarbonize the steel sector. So, how do you do that? And why is it that we have the need to decarbonize the steel sector? So, overall, we have to understand that the developmental requirements of India is going to increase the appetite for steel in the coming years. But then, here, steel industry accounts for 11% of the country's emissions currently. That is huge. 11% is not small. The transportation sector accounts for more, but in the industries, you have were the largest share occupied by iron and steel. Now, observe that in the steel manufacturing process, you have the various products, for example, coal. Coal is utilized to provide heat, and you have the coking coal, right? The industrial grade coal that is mostly imported. Now, when you burn that coking coal, you emit CO2, carbon monoxide, in the process. Then, when you carry out the sintering or when you carry out the blast furnace, in that you manufacture steel and iron, here also in both of these, be it the steel manufacturing or iron manufacturing or the preparation of materials, everything emits CO2, CO, etc. So it is polluting the environment. Now, we cannot have that condition going ahead as the steel production will increase in the coming days. We are the world's second largest producer of crude steel and second largest consumer of finished steel. And this consumption is set to increase. Overall, in the year 21-22, we had close to around 120 metric tons of annual production of steel, right? 120 metric tons and 120 million tons rather. And that is set to increase to around 300 million tons by the year 2030 because the demands will be more. You have more expressways which are being made. You have more railway lines which are being laid. You have more airports which are being constructed. Infrastructure construction in India as of now is amongst the fastest or the largest happening anywhere across the globe. The rate of infrastructure growth. So that will consume what? Steel. And for that, it will have emissions. So already India is gaining a bad name because of the emissions, the amount of emissions that it carries. So if these emissions tend to continue, the impact of it will be quite cascading. So India's crude steel production is estimated to increase to around 435 million tons by the year 2050, means greater amount of emission. So we need to carry out decarbonization. Decarbonization is what? In the production process, you remove the emission of carbon and carbon products in general. That is referred to as decarbonization. So, production process is made carbon neutral. Carbon neutral basically means either you don't emit that carbon dioxide, or if you are emitting, ensure that you capture that carbon and then you store it or you sequester it into the ground. So either you don't emit or you carry out carbon capture and storage. Now, why is it that decarbonization needs to be carried out? First of all, if you still continue the same methodologies of production, that is by the usage of coal, coking coal, etc., all of that needs to be imported. Significant quantity needs to be imported. Every year, we import large quantities of coking coal from Australia, South Africa, Indonesia, etc. So that is a drain on the foreign exchange reserves. So that will save the crucial foreign exchange. So what will be the replacement of coking coal? The replacement can be green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, for example. And what is green hydrogen? You produce hydrogen by electrolysis of water, and for that the energy that is required, you gain that from renewable energy sources. So that the hydrogen that is produced, that is green hydrogen. So it is eco-friendly, environmentally friendly. So that green hydrogen overall can be a source, can be an alternative. Now, once you decarbonize the steel sector, right now the world has not done that, and we know that the future is going to be a kind of a decarbonized economy in general. The future is not going to be of carbon emissions. The world is going to clamp down on carbon emissions at a very unprecedented rate within the next 5 to 7 years. So better we develop the technology now, better we make it efficient right now, so that we can set up a kind of a global supply base. We have an early mover advantage. We can be a supply hub overall, right? And then it will also help in meeting the international commitments on climate change. For example, at the Conference of Parties 26 to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that was held in Glasgow 2021, India declared the Panchamrit goals. Now, amongst the various aspects of the goals, one of the goal which was mentioned was reduction of carbon intensity in GDP. So the various sectors which are carbon intensive, their proportion would be reduced in the GDP. They would be made much more cleaner. That is why for the past couple of years, you would find that there is an increased movement towards the aspect, or investments are happening in green ammonia, green methane, you have green hydrogen. So all of that is happening in order to replace the alternative for carbon intensive industries. Now, that is where it will help India meet the international commitments. Then it helps adapt to changing regulatory regime. For example, you have recently the case where European Union has imposed the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, this CBAM basically is a measure or is a tool by which the European Union will impose higher taxes on fertilizer, steel, then aluminium, etc., which are imported into European Union from the other countries where the emissions are carried out significantly. So for example, if let's say Russia, China, or India exports steel to Europe, they will have to face larger taxes, so the product will be much more costlier. Why is it that European Union has imposed this? That is because European Union, it is particularly convinced that look, in our own space in Europe, we have a particular emission standards. So that is why we manufacture the products in a cleaner process. A country such as China or a country like India, they don't have those environmental standards, so they will produce it naturally as they do, and that is why their steel will be cheaper. So in order to provide a competitive advantage to the European industries, what European Union has started doing is it has started levying taxes on these carbon intensive products when they are brought in to Europe. So that is basically the regulatory regime. So Indian steel sector is going to suffer from that. And with the passage of time, this is going to increase quite significantly and quite exponentially. The entire world is going to clamp down. So, better to move already towards the manufacturing of green steel in general. So, what are the issues and the challenges? Right? So, what are the issues and the challenges that we face? So, amongst the issues, the first issue is that here hydrogen based production is uncompetitive. Price uncompetitive means what? Hydrogen in itself is very costly. And because the hydrogen in itself is very costly, the steel which is manufactured is also very costly. So the demand in the international market for the costlier steel obviously won't be there. So green hydrogen is much costlier than the other types of hydrogen. For example, you also have gray hydrogen, right, etc. So if you want to use the alternative as green hydrogen, it will not be a cheap affair. It will be a costly process. Technological efficiency is lacking in non-carbon based production. You don't have, we have still not gained that kind of a production proficiency, a technological proficiency in the alternates. Carbon capture and storage, in order to gain and achieve carbon neutrality, we need to provide carbon capture and storage, and that in itself is a costly process. We have seen the drawbacks of it emerging in many of the areas of northern Europe, where they were capturing carbon, storing it in the permafrost. Now, the permafrost in itself is melting, increasing the chances of that carbon leaking out into the atmosphere. So, this is a costly process and is also an unknown. You need to have a lot of technological finesse in order to capture the carbon and store it. So, we don't have it as of now. So, these are the challenges. And what is the way forward? Rapid advancement in hydrogen tech is needed. This is required not only for the steel sector, but other carbon intensive industries as well. So, steel, fertilizer, aluminium, right? Transportation. Okay. In all of these, we need to have the hydrogen technology, which will have some implications. So, there needs to be a rapid advancement. And we can introduce a kind of a CO2 pricing, a kind of a variety of carbon tax, right? Carbon tax, for example, that can be introduced. Or we can simply provide a kind of a pricing that this much amount of carbon dioxide is emitted, you need to pay that much cost for that carbon dioxide. So that will offset the cost of production by hydrogen. But then increased attention has to be provided to scrap metal usage, that is the recycling of the steel, that is recycling process. Because when we talk about that scrap metal, in that process of recycling there is very almost little amount of carbon which is produced in the process. So as much as we recycle, not only will the price point come down, it will be ecologically sound and ecologically friendly practice at the same time. You need to have policy measures to provide support for green steel. Green steel is the steel which is manufactured without the utility of any fossil fuel, that is green steel, made without fossil fuel. Okay, we need to have the exploration of the international markets, because please understand, as I told you, the early mover advantage is very important for any particular industry. So when you explore international market, that will develop market for exports, and exports will increase. When exports increase, what happens? You need to ramp up production, so production volume increases. Production volume increases. And when you have the production volume which increases, as a consequence of that, what happens? When you produce something in larger bulk, the price point comes down. When you manufacture something in small quantity, it will be costly. But when you manufacture something in large quantity, it will be cheaper. So, cheaper products, or in a sense, you can have cost effectiveness. Right? Now, when the product will be cost effective, will there be a greater demand internationally and nationally also? Yes. So that will also lead to greater export. So it will be a kind of a virtuous cycle which we are going to attain. And steel sector is very important in terms of jobs creation as well. It is one of the large job providers out there in the Indian economy. So we also need to create various different production hubs out there. The centers of production of the steel needs to be carried out. Okay, so that is the way forward for decarbonization. So what is decarbonization? In a way, bringing out the manufacturing process where so much amount of carbon dioxide and carbon products, they are not released into the environment. It is environmentally friendly in the process of production. That is decarbonization. So here, why it needs to be carried out, that is something we have seen. What are the challenges and the way forward? So iron and steel is considered to be the backbone of developmental requirements. In the context of the statement, discuss the importance of decarbonizing the sector and suggest measures to achieve the same. So, as simple as it can get. So, here you talk about in the introduction the importance of steel, very briefly, and then in the body you talk about what is decarbonization, you talk about the role of decarbonization, the challenges and the way forward. I'm sure you'll be able to write it down. It is very important, guys, to put pen to paper and start writing down. Unless and until you write down, you won't have that proficiency in answer writing which is required to qualify for the mains exam. So try practicing as much as you can. Now we pick up a topic from the magazine of Kurukshetra, a very brief topic for that matter, that is promotion and development of handloom and handicrafts in the country. And this particular article, it talks about the fact that handloom sector needs to be looked into for the developmental process of the handloom and the handicrafts. So India is a very distinct country in the sense that we have a wide cultural landscape from north to south, from east to west. The cultural landscape, the traditional norms that we follow are simply very, very diverse. Now, each and every region has got their own particular skill set and has got their own particular cultural handicrafts and handlooms which are produced in the process. So that is why we have had a rich heritage of the handlooms and handicrafts being produced. And the handloom sector in general is very important for the rural economy because it provides income directly into the hands of the rural economy. And that is when it has the potential to alleviate poverty or remove poverty and bring about a mass upliftment in the status, economic status of the population. Now, various different art forms, from let's say work on metals to silk saris, etc., to various craft, everything has developed, and that is attributable to certain factors. Availability of raw materials, that varies in different parts of the country. So not everywhere will you find that the handicraft they use the same materials. You have certain regions which specialize in silk, for example, certain regions which specialize in wood. So you have a variation, and there is a kind of a legacy skill transfer, that the skill has been transferred through the ages in a hereditary manner. So that is why you still have quite a varied amount of handicrafts which are generated. And then you have the local cultural traditions, religious beliefs which are associated, all of them bring about a variety in handloom sector. But still, the handloom sector and the handicraft sector is not doing as good as it should. Ideally, if it wants to remove the problems of the rural part of the country, it has to serve on multiple parameters, which it is still not able to do. So, there are certain reasons for the poor condition of handicrafts and the handlooms. And that is something which is in existence ever since the time of the advent of the Britishers in India. So, when the East India Company came in, at that point of time, Indian artisans were in great demand in the international market. And you had some of the very rich families, they basically specialized in manufacturing of handicrafts and handlooms. They were known across the world. And as has been documented in various history books, when the Britishers came in, they targeted these handloom owners because these handloom owners, they were eating into their industrial production of cotton. Britishers would manufacture cotton in large quantity, but these handloom owners would manufacture products which would be much more in demand in the international market and would also be of a superior quality. So, as the famous anecdote goes, that the British officials, they went searching for these handlooms and the handicraft manufacturers, and the weavers, the handloom weavers, their thumbs were broken so that they cannot manufacture them. So there was an impoverishment, of the handicraft and the handloom sector, impoverishment of the sort which was unprecedented. And in general, there was an impoverishment of the Indian middle class and the Indian economy as well. So, even in the local market, even in the local sector, people who would buy from these artisans, they did not have the ability to buy these things anymore. So, as a result, the artisans they started getting poorer and poorer. Many of them they left the traditional methods of art and production, and they switched to various different to work as landless laborers and migrants in general. So the sector declined. Also, you did not have adequate amount of funds which were available. Many of the times the raw materials after independence the government had many different priorities. Obviously, a country which has a large population and the country which doesn't have enough food to fill the bellies of the population will have different priorities. So this sector has been ignored for a very long time, and that has brought about a considerable decline. So here, advent of the East India Company and the advent of the Britishers, impoverishment of Indians during the British rule meant that no patrons for the products manufactured by these handlooms and handicraft workers. Now it has been restricted to fewer families. So there is not a greater identity of these products which are left anymore. So that is why even the skill development is being restricted. So skill development is limited. Lack of adequate income, so many artisans they left the sector. You don't have a standard quality certification, lack of funding. So all of these have been the reasons why slowly and steadily the health of this sector has been declining, and there has been a sharp decline. This sector has got a significant amount of role. It can provide a kind of a large scale income generation. And in the rural household, basically, it will also bring about the female labor force participation. So, a better economic equality in the rural areas will be brought by this. Then, a cultural continuity. Cultural continuity, in the sense, the cultural tradition that has been carried out for the ages, that will continue further. And then the GI tag, the geographical identity which is being provided, those GI tags, they also, in a way, enhance the prestige of that place, prestige of that artwork. So, this is why the sector needs to be protected, and that is what the article talks about. Now, here is a list of certain governmental measures which have been initiated in order to protect the handicraft and the handloom. Now, this is not something which is included in the article, but this is for your information that if, let's suppose, a question is framed that what is it that the government is doing on its part, so these are few of the governmental measures. Development of handloom mark. This is the handloom mark to ensure that the product is authentic. Then Mahatma Gandhi Bunkar Bima Yojana to provide a kind of monetary relief in case of weaver's death or disability. Then Jan Shri Bima Yojana for handicraft artisans, that is a health insurance. Then integrated handloom developmental scheme to provide skill development funding mechanism in the handloom sector, skill development and training in weaving, dyeing, marketing, etc. of the handloom, right? Business management, everything, in order to take them at par with the global producers in general. Global producers of the various merchandises, they operate on a very large scale. Economies of scale are followed. So if the handicrafts and the weavers of the country, they have to compete with them, they have to upgrade the skill, they have to upgrade the technology. So here you also have the Ambedkar, Baba Sahib Ambedkar Hastshilp Vikas Yojana, that is again going to provide a kind of a skill upgradation and skill training. Then for technology upgradation, you have an establishment of technology upgradation fund. By that, it provides the subsidies to the weavers for purchase of newer machineries and equipment, factory building, renovation of existing factories, etc., to have efficient production. for efficient production. Okay, and provision of GI tags. So, what is GI? GI is geographical indication. Geographical indication. So, this is basically, for example, in any particular area, if let's say there has been a traditional silk which is produced, so it will be provided with a GI tag. So, it attaches itself with a kind of a prestige, elevation, a kind of a recognition of that artisanal work, and that will ensure that there is a continuity in the future also. That will also ensure that many impoverished families who are in that process of production, they have an increased scope to sell their products not only in the national market but also the demand from abroad as well. Okay, so yes, we can include the PM Mitra scheme as well. So this is the very basic of few of the government schemes. You have many more government schemes which have been brought in, so you can include the various government schemes when you are writing an answer. So the question: discuss the causes for the poor health of handlooms and handicraft sector in India. Each of the points that we have discussed, you have to write minimum 2 to 3 sentences for each one of them. Analyze the role played by the sector and measures taken to protect and promote it in India and abroad. So that is where you bring about the governmental schemes, the role played by the sector, economic role, the equality aspect of the role, where the female labor participation is also ensured. All of that can be highlighted. Yes, Shunya, that needs to be highlighted. Okay, so I hope that is understood. Now, moving on to the last topic that appeared in the magazine of Yojana, that is use of technology in urban planning. Now, this is a kind of a very brief article in the magazine of Yojana, and it talks about the importance of urban planning and usage of technology. Now, urban planning means what? That you develop the urban landscape in such a way that it is efficient, affordable, it solves the purpose of the citizens for today, and it is capable enough to solve the purposes 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the line. That is why the portion of urban planning is very essential for development, and why it is important, particularly in a developing country like India, where we experience mass migrations in general, where we have large scale rapid urbanization. As of now, we still have only 35% urban population as per the 2011 census. And the rate of urban centers, the establishment of newer urban centers is increasing at an unprecedented rate. And this brings about its own set of problems. When large section of population they will suddenly migrate to urban areas, it will have its own developmental issues. Lack of affordable housing means what? People will be living in shanties and slums. That means poor hygiene, lack of waste disposal, lack of public services. And that would mean what? A lot of people would be moving from one end of the city to the other end of the city, right? If you don't have available housing, you don't have affordable housing, what happens? People live 20 kilometers away from where they have to go for work, and they end up traveling. So in a city, if a lot of people they end up traveling from one end to other end, what happens? You have traffic jams. And with traffic jams comes what? You have environmental problems. You have unsustained construction. For example, take the case of Bangalore. Bangalore is crumbling under the weight of the increased rate of urbanization because there has not been an urban planning. So, urban planning is very essential to decongest the cities, but also to provide services to the citizens involved. Now, here, technology can be made a partner in it, and there can be significant help, technological help that we can gain. So, planning based on service delivery, that is, the individuals, they need to be understood. That what is the requirement of the individuals who are coming to the city or who are living in the city? They need proper infrastructure in terms of electricity supply, in terms of water connectivity, in terms of sewage supply, in terms of road connectivity, in terms of public transportation. That needs to be made available. Now, design the urban landscape in such a way that all of these are available in every part of the city, while human minds have the limitation. In the age of AI or artificial intelligence, this can be achieved. And here we can have the usage of geographical information system, or GIS basically, which gives you an idea or a geographical mapping of a region. And there you can have layered development. What is layered development? For example, if suppose this is the natural landscape, here you can have various different layered maps available, that what will be the movement and utilities for the public transportation in the same area. Where is it that we will have public spaces? Where is it that public facilities, common areas, wedding halls, meeting convention centers, etc., the economic opportunity, the production centers. So like that, the technology can help you devise an efficient planning structure so that services are catered to. As of now, in whichever part of the country you are living in, and this is something which unites us all, whichever part of the country you are living in, north, south, east, west, one thing you would have all observed, and that is, in your area, you would have observed there is frequent digging or construction work. Some or the other area would be dug out to lay pipelines. Then it would be refilled. A road would be constructed. Then again it would be dug out. Why? To lay cables now. And then again road would be constructed. Then again after some time it would be dug out. Why? To lay electricity cables now. Then gas pipeline, then again road. Now, understand the amount of inefficiency, the cost, and also the inconvenience caused to the public. That is huge. If we take the help of technology, all of this can be significantly solved, isn't it? There is a solution which is offered for this. So that is why technology needs to be taken a help of. And GIS can be used for record keeping, such as for property mapping. Property mapping is another one of those. We don't have an exact clue because all the municipalities, they are in such poor health. Property tax is one of the major source of revenue for many of them. So that is where we don't have proper property mapping. And also, for the healthy development, for the planned development of an urban area, first of all, you need to develop the public utilities, roads, sewage lines, and then allow the property to be sold or developed. But in India, what is happening? Properties are sold, land is sold, and then whatever space is left in between, there only you utilize, you manufacture, you build roads, there only you will use it for drainage, etc. That is why we have an increased inefficiency in terms of public delivery. Right. Now, it can be used for solid waste management in general, water supply, sanitation, and also for transportation planners. The city of Bangalore has now become world famous for the transportation woes and difficulties that it has. So, while devising or designing a new plan, it will always have the ability to have an efficient transportation system. In the sense, efficient does not mean that you have very high fly machines out there. No, it means that office spaces, urban parks, urban landscapes, residential spaces, they are built in an area where people don't need to travel large distances, where it is convenient to walk, right? Take the case of Singapore, take the case of Hong Kong, take the case of Tokyo. You'll find people walking up to their office spaces. That is how the urban landscape is being developed. That needs to be inculcated here also, and technology can be a solution. Then you have Internet of Things, which can also be helpful. Internet of Things is what? Basically, in simplest of the simple terms, it is when, with the help of the online medium or internet, you can end up controlling many services at the same time. So that is where, for example, intelligent street lighting can be implemented in the urban development. Now, in India, majority of the cities, they have very poor lighting system. In the case of the street lighting, you'll find absolute pitch darkness, which not only makes it unsafe for the vehicles, but also unsafe for the general public, right? So intelligent street lighting saves energy also. And then automatic plungers, when you have excess rainfall, these automatic plungers can become activated, that can activate themselves and can evacuate waters, prevent flooding in the process. So these things can always be brought to a rescue. Rescue of what? Of the urban areas. Urban areas in India, they and developing nations, they are required to be rescued from their present difficulties. And technology and internet can be a solution if utilized properly. Okay, so that is what this particular article talks about. Now, need for the usage helps predict the future requirements. Requirements not 5 years down the line, but requirements 50 years down the line. So you develop your infrastructure resilient enough to face that requirement. Okay, so keep into account the amount of migration which will happen, the number of people who will get in, that needs to be accounted for and then developed. Then cost, it will be cost effective. As I told you, multiple digging and refilling exercise, that will be done away with. Then utilization of hybridized spaces, residential come workspaces, so that you don't have to travel significantly. Service delivery to large population size. Which service are we talking about? Waste management, water supply, electricity supply, transportation services. Those are the services needed to be provided. Traffic management and self sufficiency of the urban landscape, right? Each and every small sector is self sufficient within itself. It should have a park, it should have open spaces where the people can move in, and it should have walkable roads also. It should have street lighting. So that is how tech can come to the rescue. Now, the question: what is the requirement for urban planning, the role of urban planning in general? How can we harness technology to mitigate the developmental issues faced in urban areas? So, first of all, in the introduction, you write, what is urban planning? It is planning and designing the urban landscapes to meet the present as well as the future requirements. As simple as that. That is where you can end the introduction, or that is where after that you can initiate writing the portion that this is very much required to cater to the future demands and to ensure a seamless flow of services to the citizens. And then you talk about the requirements. You cite examples. You can cite examples of any city that you like in India, the problems that they are facing, for example, urban flooding, etc. That is why proper planning is needed. So, all those you write, and then after that, you can switch over to the portion of technology and you can complete the answer. Okay. So, what is decongestion? Decongestion basically is in any area, if you have a lot of population, you spread it out. Congested means what? A lot of people are in the same place. So, traffic jams. Traffic jams means environmental pollution. So, all of that, you spread out the population, spread it out thinly so that it is decongested. Okay. Right. GI means geographical identity. Hybridized spaces here, residential come workspaces. So you should not have to travel 20 kilometers to go into an area where only offices are there, and then another area where only residences. In your own small area, you should have offices, residential spaces, everything. Okay. So that is where we'll restrict the session here today. I hope the session has been helpful to you guys. Kindly try to write the answers, send it to us. We'll get them evaluated, and that is how you will improve. So thank you for the patience that you have shown and the kind words. Till we meet again, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you and good night.